Welcome to the Ducks Unlimited podcast, the only podcast about all things waterfowl. From hunting insights to science-based discussions about ducks, geese, and issues affecting waterfowl and wetlands conservation in North America, we bring the resource to you. The DU Podcast with your hosts, Chris Jennings and Dr. Mike Brazier.
Welcome back to Season 5. I am here with my co-host, Dr. Mike Brazier. Mike, how are you?
I'm doing well. Chris, how you doing?
We are going to kick off Season 5 with just a little bit of an overview of, hey, we're coming into the duck season, or coming into fall. Some seasons are still pretty far out, but some early seasons. We got some teal action. We got some early season Canada goose. But we want to just provide a little bit of an overview of what we're looking at, from a conservation and even a, waterfowl, even just enthusiast perspective as we go into the fall. So, Mike, can you give us just a little bit of a roundup of what we're looking at going into the fall as far as habitat, and I know this is going to be tough because it's a broad landscape here, but just kind of give us a little insight on what we're looking at.
I will, but first I'm going to take exception to you not answering my question about me whenever I said, how you doing?
Oh, I'm good.
Before I answer what we're looking at in Season 5, I did want to just kind of on behalf of all of us here at the podcast, give some acknowledgement to our listeners. We continue to grow our listener base. We appreciate that and encourage you all to share the availability of the podcast with all your friends. It's pretty exciting deal for us here to be able to bring a lot of this information to you and connect you with a lot of the folks that actually have the information out in the field. So we're continuing to try to do good things and appreciate y'all's listening. So thank you for all that and for telling others about it. And so with regard to what we're looking at here as we go into the fall and winter, it's been a busy summer, and that's going to continue into the fall and winter, and hope that folks appreciate the type of information that we're trying to bring you to kind of let you know about some of the uncertainty, try to demystify some of the uncertainty that it kind of feels like we're all going through with regard to drought on the prairies. The listeners from the Season 4 this past summer will certainly know that we've paid a lot of attention to that, talking to people up on the prairies, trying to get some sort of firsthand accounts of what they're seeing. We've had to go through another year without a full complement of the breeding population and habitat survey data, and that's making a lot of us anxious about not having data for 2 consecutive years on the population size and habitat conditions, especially given what we're seeing with regard to the drought on the prairies. And then of course, drought in the western U.S., all throughout the western U.S. is certainly an issue that has developed over the past year, I suppose. And we're going to, all of those things will continue to be a topic of conversation, both within the organization, among our members, among our hunter constituents, hunter supporters, and we're going to try to answer all your questions about it, and bring you the information that we think you're looking for, certainly information that we're looking for when we talk with folks from the Fish and Wildlife Service. And so that's another thing that as we kind of get into the fall, we're pretty soon going to see the recommendation from the Fish and Wildlife Service for regulations for the 22-23 hunting season. So a lot of questions around that. We're going to try to reconnect with Dr. Ken Richkus on that, have him walk us through kind of what went into that. And then, just a whole bunch of other things that we're going to bring to folks, and some of which will be pretty basic stuff, talking more science and conservation. And I suspect you're going to have some more shotgunning and retriever training and maybe some new product information. How's all that looking?
No, it's great. I mean, I think, as we get in the fall, a lot of that gets a little easier from my perspective, certainly, because it's the hot topic. Conversations come easy during duck season, especially when, we're talking to some of our typical guests. We've got Jay Anglin in the Great Lakes. We've got John Pullman in the Central Flyway, who consistently provide pretty good updates, migration alerts, things like that, but also provide those tips, tactics. Those guys, it's just like any duck hunter. You get talking to these people, and these conversations come so easy because we're talking about layout blinds or duck boats or duck boat safety or retrievers, calling. I've got one thing to look forward to this fall is a really great show with Brad Allen, the owner of Elite Calls, 3-time world duck calling champion. And he really gets into, learning how to call, but also learning how to competitive call. And then he gets into making calls. And so we've got a bunch of cool guests like that coming up, which I'm excited about. Plus, like I said, it's duck season. It's easy to sit around and talk. I've been sitting around talking about duck season for the last 4 years straight. So actually the last 30 years straight. But so that kind of stuff comes easy. But I think one thing that jumped out to me this summer, you had some great guests, some of our science partners and even Ducks Unlimited staff, Ducks Unlimited Canada staff, talking about the conditions. And we talk about that. That's kind of a priority for the organization right now to look at these drought conditions and take into account. But some of the things that I'm hearing from either messages or emails or things like, or just guys who are in my duck club, they're asking like, how is this drought impacting this year? And what's, people are starting to get it. Like I said, when I answered your question, how am I, anxious?
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of unknowns and there's a lot of unknowns for how this drought's going to impact, how this season's going to play out. Obviously we've had some difficult seasons in the South the last couple of years, maybe several. A lot of that was weather related, whether too much water, not enough weather, not enough cold weather, things like that. But now we're adding a new element. And I think that's got people a little bit hesitant to look at the big picture here and man, like what's duck season going to be like? So what would you tell people who would ask something like that? I mean, that's a pretty far out question. But what's the expectation here?
Sure. I'll give a little, couple minute sort of response to that, but I'll also say that here listeners can look forward in September to a couple of continuing conversations about what drought conditions look like on the prairies. Dr. Mike Anderson is going to be talking with us about what he's actually seen in southwestern Manitoba. We'll reconnect with Dr. Scott Stevens. He's going to be out chasing teal later this month, and so he will have some insights on some of the very questions that you're talking about. Like, so there's wetland conditions that are kind of driven by the precipitation patterns. Drought is just a time when when we're lacking abundant precipitation enough to put water, in the wetlands in the case of how we think about it. And so what does that mean for production this year out of the prairies? And everything that we have heard from partners across that region is that it's widespread dry. It's pretty severely dry. In some locations, certainly the severest drought that we've seen since the late 80s. Now, the prairies of U.S. and Canada are not all extremely, exceptionally dry. There are portions of eastern South Dakota that are producing some ducks. There are some portions in some of the western provinces that are producing some ducks. But nevertheless, it is still a pretty dry landscape. So what that's going to mean is low duck production out of the prairies. And so important thing to keep in mind here is when we think about where the ducks that are produced in the prairies go, the hunters that are going to feel the greatest pinch from a prairie drought are going to be those in the central and Mississippi flyways. Pacific flyway hunters are going to get most of their birds from Alaska, some of the more western prairie provinces, the western boreal forest. Conditions up there are pretty darn good from what we've heard. But of course, hunters in the western U.S. and the Pacific Flyway are dealing with a drought of their own that's going to have an entirely different kind of set of ramifications for their hunting situations this year. And that's going to be a big topic for us as we go forward, talking with some of the people that are out there. A series of episodes we're trying to line up related to that to kind of help folks understand what's going on there. Atlantic flyway waterfowl hunters are going to be mainly looking towards the boreal forest, eastern Canada, some from the prairies for sure that are going to be producing those ducks. So they'll feel a little pinch from the prairie drought, not as strong of a pinch, not as big of a pinch as the Mississippi and Central Flyway hunters, but nevertheless, they'll see an effect as well. So, on balance, we expect low production, if not very low production out of the prairies. It's not a bust. We've talked to enough people to know that there are ducks being produced. There have been some years in the past where in some geographies there were no ducks produced at all. Southwestern Manitoba, that's not the case. There are a few ducks being produced out of there, not many, but so overall, low duck production out of the prairies. Boreal forest is in good condition, according to Dr. Fritz Reed, good to excellent condition. So you think about species like green wings, ringneck ducks, widgeon, scaup, goldeneye. There's a few others there. I feel like I'm missing a major one. But anyway, there are some species that are really closely tied to the boreal, and they're not going to be as affected as much by a prairie drought. And so that's kind of something to keep in mind as well. But the result of low productivity is going to be a lot of adult birds in those that you do see. Now, we came into this breeding season thinking that duck breeding populations were still pretty good. If you go back to 2019, that was the last year where we actually had data on breeding population size. And I think we counted somewhere around 9 million mallards, give or take. I'm getting my years mixed up. I think they projected 9.2 million mallards in 2020. That was kind of the equation-based projection, lacking the actual survey. But if you go back to 2019 when we actually had data, we were still around that 9 million mark. That's a healthy duck population, mallard population. If you go back to the late 80s and look at mallard population sizes, you're at 4 million, 4.5 million, 5 million. So I get that people are saying, hey, it feels weird to be going into a liberal season with a severe drought on the prairies, but duck populations are still pretty good. You know, if we had 9.2 million mallards estimated, granted, but it was going to be in the ballpark in 2020, we would not have seen a tremendous drop, just from last year to this year. Drought doesn't kill ducks. Drought doesn't kill ducks, at least not the first year of a drought. And it really doesn't to begin with. But what drought does is it reduces productivity, and then all of that takes away that annual replacement, that annual growth of a population. So it's not like
I think that's a misconception that some people have, like some guys that I know who are big hunters, they're asking me like, so there's not going to be any ducks. Like, well, there's still ducks.
Yeah.
It's just, next year's ducks.
That's right.
You're talking about production. And so I think that's where there's a little bit of a misconception there. But it's definitely going to be, as we kind of transition into fall, especially out west, you're going to see, I guess the focus in right now has been really on the production side in the breeding areas, the drought there. Once we get out west, we're going to start really seeing some impacts on the wintering habitat, even, migration habitat as well. But, that's something that I know you're going to address several shows. That's going to be, very informative for our audience. And then, I've got one coming up very soon with Fritz Reed, who talks about this whole aspect of these ducks showing up in the prairies. It's dry. What happens? They're going to the boreal. What is the boreal habitat? How does the boreal, handle this? What's productivity look like in the boreal? It's hard to judge. And Fritz really gets into the details of that, including some of the issues that the boreal is facing as far as conservation. But I think we're going to, I think our audience should be very excited about season 5. I know we are. And just some housekeeping real quick. We're in studio. We've got a podcast studio. We've also got complimentary lukewarm water bottles now. This is great. I mean, this is fantastic. We've got water, we've got drinks, we've got snacks. So we're really kicking it off.
Hey, I was on a podcast the other day and they had some videos. Like we get asked to kind of comment on different questions, some of which are related to the things we've been talking about, the drought and production this year. And so I actually had the camera set up in this room here when I did that. And they were very complimentary of our setup that we have here with some of the artifacts kind of spill over from our waterfowling Heritage Center. And so folks here have done a nice job in this little room, kind of getting us set up pretty well. So we're making some progress here as the Ducks Unlimited podcast. Water bottles and a few decorations in the place. So it's all good.
Yeah, pretty soon we'll have hats.
Ooh, look out.
Watch out. But no, as we roll into season 5 and continue to, kick out shows, we're going to also provide our audience some much more in-depth of organizational updates, some different things within our fundraising, some different event style discussions that, I think, will really bring to light some of the things that DU does, how Ducks Unlimited actually works as an organization, and everything from the fundraising to the conservation side.
And there's a lot of things to celebrate too right now.
That's
like
right.
Coming out of the pandemic, I suspect. I don't know if we have Adam lined up yet, but I suspect we do have Adam, and maybe even get Doug on, our president, on again as well, to talk about some of the exciting things that have happened with us this year, celebrating 15 million acres conserved. And is it next year, our 85th anniversary? Is that right? So a lot of things are happening within Ducks Unlimited to be really excited about. And I know those folks, and I'm happy to hear that you've got Adam and others lined up to talk about that.
Mike, are you ready for season 5?
Man, I am ready. Absolutely. It'll be fun. Thanks, everybody, for joining us.
Make sure to subscribe, rate, and review the Ducks Unlimited podcast wherever you download your podcast. I'd like to thank my co-host, Dr. Mike Brazier, for bringing awesome science to the DU podcast. I'd like to thank our producer, Clay Baird, for putting the podcast together and getting it out to you. And I'd like to thank you, the listener, for joining us and supporting wetlands conservation.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the DU Podcast. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to the show, and visit www.ducks.org/DU Podcast for resources based on today's topics, as well as access to more episodes. Opinions expressed by guests do not necessarily reflect those of Ducks Unlimited. Until next time, stay tuned to the Ducks.